Ethan Bell was a fixture at the Gilded Lily, a restaurant that epitomized elegance and exclusivity. For 6 years, he had navigated its opulent dining room with a practiced grace, each movement a testament to his dedication. Every detail mattered: the precise angle of the silverware, the perfectly chilled wine glasses, and above all, the unspoken hierarchy that dictated the level of service each guest received. The Gilded Lily catered to the city's elite, CEOs, celebrities, and socialites, and Ethan took immense pride in upholding its prestigious reputation. He adjusted his crisp white shirt, his eyes darting across the room, assessing the needs of each table. Table 6 needed more breadsticks. Table 9's wine glasses were almost empty. The sommelier was dealing with the demanding couple at Table 2, thankfully saving him the trouble. Ethan's feet ached, a constant companion after 10-hour shifts, but he ignored the discomfort. This was his domain, and he was its orchestrator. The gentle murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the tantalizing aromas of truffle oil and roasted duck filled the air. The Gilded Lily was more than just a restaurant. It was a carefully curated experience, a refuge from the outside world. Ethan understood his role in maintaining that illusion, and he guarded it fiercely. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors swung open, shattering the carefully crafted ambiance. A woman stood in the entrance, her presence jarringly out of place. Her coat was worn and faded, the fabric of her simple dress slightly creased. Her sensible shoes looked as though they had carried her miles, and her hair, pulled back in a practical braid, had stray strands escaping, framing a face etched with weariness. These are not the kind of characteristics you should see at the Gilded Lily, Ethan thought to himself. Ethan moved swiftly, intercepting her before the head hostess, Mrs. Davison, could even react. He glided across the dining room, his movements betraying none of the apprehension he felt. "May I help you?" he asked, his voice polite but firm, a subtle barrier erected. The woman smiled, a genuine warm smile that contrasted sharply with her appearance. Her eyes, a deep hazel, scanned the room, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the immaculate tables, and the hushed atmosphere. "I'd like a table, please." Ethan hesitated. Technically, there were a few empty tables, but he knew the unwritten rules of the Gilded Lily. They did not welcome those who didn't fit the predefined mold. He glanced at Mrs. Davison, who stood frozen, awaiting his lead. Turning back to the woman, he offered a practiced, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, madam, but we are fully booked for the evening." The woman's expression remained unchanged, as if she had anticipated this response. "That's odd," she said, her gaze drifting past him to a clearly unoccupied table near the window. Ethan's posture stiffened. "That table is reserved," he said, his voice a little too sharp. She tilted her head, studying him with an unsettling intensity. There was something in her eyes, a knowingness that made him deeply uncomfortable. But he held his ground. Mr. Thorne, the restaurant manager, would have his hide if he seated someone who didn't meet the Gilded Lily standard. The woman sighed softly, as if weighing her words carefully. Then, she reached into her coat pocket and produced a small folded piece of paper. "Since I won't be staying," she said, extending it towards him, "I'd like you to have this." Ethan frowned. Was this a complaint? A plea for a free meal? Some elaborate scam? He hesitated, then reluctantly accepted the note. "Have a good night," she said simply, before turning and walking out of the restaurant. Ethan watched her go, the folded paper clutched in his hand. He briefly considered discarding it, but something, perhaps a flicker of guilt, prevented him. He stuffed it into his pocket and forced himself to focus on his duties. The night wore on, a blur of demanding customers and complex orders. By the time his shift ended, he had almost forgotten about the encounter. He found himself alone in the dimly lit staff room, finally able to shed his uncomfortable shoes. He stretched, attempting to ease the knots in his shoulders. It had been a particularly brutal evening, filled with rushed orders and Mr. Thorne's constant critical eye. Reaching into his pocket for his wallet, his fingers brushed against the forgotten note. Curiosity piqued, he unfolded the crumpled paper. Tucked neatly inside was a crisp $50 bill. Ethan's brow furrowed. That was certainly unexpected, but it was the message written beneath that truly stunned him. Never judge a book by its cover. You may have just turned away the most important person in your life. It was signed, Eleanor Vance. Ethan's stomach dropped. What? He reread the note, his mind racing. Who was Eleanor Vance? And why would she leave him this cryptic message? A chilling premonition settled over him. He needed answers. He grabbed his phone, frantically typing Eleanor Vance into the search engine. The results loaded instantly, and his breath caught in his throat. Staring back at him was a news headline. Eleanor Vance, the visionary restaurateur behind the city's most celebrated dining empire. Ethan scrolled through the articles, his heart pounding in his chest. Eleanor Vance, the owner of the Gilded Lily, the driving force behind countless acclaimed restaurants across the country, a self-made billionaire, and one of the most influential figures in the hospitality industry. The woman he had dismissed, the one he had refused to seat, owned the restaurant he worked at. And he had failed her test, miserably. Panic surged through him. He imagined the scene tomorrow, Mr. Thorne's face contorted with fury, the inevitable consequences looming over him. He leaned back against the wall, the note trembling in his hand, the weight of his mistake crushing him. Ethan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the quiet knowing in her eyes, the subtle disappointment that had haunted him since she walked out the door. It was as if she had anticipated his reaction, testing him, waiting for him to fail. His phone lay on his nightstand, the screen still displaying the article about Eleanor Vance. He had devoured every detail, poring over interviews, business profiles, and even old news reports about her remarkable journey. She wasn't just another wealthy restaurant owner. She was a force of nature, a pioneer who had overcome immense adversity to build her empire. He remembered a particular paragraph that detailed Eleanor's early life, how she had grown up in foster care after losing her parents at a young age. She had worked tirelessly in low-wage jobs, facing constant rejection and discrimination, until a small, family-owned diner had given her a chance. She started as a busser, learned every aspect of the business from the ground up, and eventually transformed that humble diner into a culinary institution. And he had turned her away, without a second thought. Her words echoed in his mind. Never judge a book by its cover. You may have just turned away the most important person in your life. His chest tightened. What was going to happen to him? By morning, the dread had morphed into a grim resolve. He had to face the music. There was no escaping the consequences of his actions. As he walked into the Gilded Lily that afternoon, he immediately sensed a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The usual pre-dinner bustle had subsided, replaced by an unsettling quiet. His co-workers avoided his gaze, whispering amongst themselves. Some offered furtive glances of sympathy, while others simply stared with a mixture of pity and disdain. Olivia, one of the senior waitresses, was polishing glasses at the bar when he approached. She didn't look up. "Olivia?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" She sighed heavily, finally meeting his gaze. "You haven't heard?" Ethan's stomach plummeted. "Heard what?" She hesitated, then pulled out her phone, scrolling through the screen. "This," she said, handing him the device. Ethan stared at the headline. Eleanor Vance's undercover test at the Gilded Lily goes viral. His throat went dry as he scanned the article. Renowned restaurateur Eleanor Vance, known for her unconventional evaluation methods, conducted an unannounced inspection at the Gilded Lily last night, posing as a regular customer. A waiter, unaware of her identity, denied her service due to her appearance, despite available seating. Sources say Vance left a note behind, later confirming that it was a deliberate test of the restaurant's commitment to inclusivity and genuine hospitality. Ethan's vision blurred. His name wasn't explicitly mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Everyone at the Gilded Lily knew who the waiter in the story was. His grip on the phone tightened. Who leaked this? Olivia took her phone back, tucking it into her apron. No one here, I don't think. Probably someone on her team. It's not the first time she's done something like this, and people eat it up. The article's already trending online. Ethan swallowed hard. So, Thorne knows? Olivia gave him a look that conveyed the obvious. Of course he knows. Ethan felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. His fingers curled into fists. Is she coming back? Olivia's lips pressed together. She's already here. His breath hitched. His gaze darted towards the entrance to the private dining room, a space reserved for VIPs, celebrities, and high-profile business meetings. The doors were closed, but he knew Eleanor Vance was inside, talking to Mr. Thorne. About him. Olivia lowered her voice. They're calling a staff meeting in 15 minutes. Ethan exhaled shakily, running a hand down his face. 15 minutes. 15 minutes until my fate is sealed. He turned away, his pulse thundering in his ears, and made his way to the back of the restaurant. The kitchen staff was busy with pre-service preparations, the clatter of pots and pans and the sizzling of sautéing vegetables filling the air. Normally, the sounds and smells of the kitchen comforted him, but today they only amplified his anxiety. 15 minutes. He pulled out his phone again, rereading the article, searching for any clue as to Eleanor's next move. Would she fire him on the spot? Would Thorne publicly humiliate him in front of the entire staff? He hadn't meant to be cruel. He was just doing his job, right? But the more he reflected, the more he realized that his job never required him to judge people. He had made that choice himself, fueled by prejudice and a misguided sense of loyalty to the Gilded Lily brand. His hands clenched at his sides. He had to own this. If Eleanor Vance was going to confront him, he had to be prepared. The 15 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. By the time he walked into the staff meeting, the tension in the room was almost suffocating. Every server, busser, and kitchen worker was gathered, their faces etched with apprehension. Mr. Thorne stood at the front, his usual smug expression replaced by an unreadable mask. And standing beside him was Eleanor Vance. Gone was the worn coat, the simple dress, and the tired expression. She stood tall and regal, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her presence commanding respect. She wasn't just a customer anymore. She was the owner, the boss, the ultimate authority. Ethan felt his pulse spike. The room fell silent as Thorne cleared his throat. I assume most of you have already heard the news, he said, his voice clipped. Ms. Vance has graciously decided to visit the Gilded Lily again today, and she has a few words to say. A ripple of unease passed through the staff. Eleanor Vance stepped forward. I won't take up too much of your time, she said, her voice smooth and controlled. But I want to be very clear about something. Her gaze swept the room, before settling directly on Ethan. There is no policy, written or unwritten, in this restaurant, or any restaurant I own, that dictates a guest must look a certain way to be treated with dignity and respect. Ethan's throat went dry. I built this company on the belief that food is a universal connector, Eleanor continued. That service is not just for the wealthy, and that respect doesn't come with a price tag. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. What happened last night was a test, and it was a failure. A profound failure. Silence descended upon the room. Ethan felt the weight of every eye upon him. Eleanor exhaled, folding her hands in front of her. That being said, I don't believe in simply punishing people for making a mistake. I believe in learning and growth. Ethan's heart pounded. Thorne finally spoke, his voice tight with barely suppressed fury. Ethan, step forward. Ethan felt like his legs were moving independently of his will. He walked slowly towards the front of the room, his eyes fixed on Eleanor Vance. She held his gaze, and for the first time, he saw something in her expression that wasn't judgment or disappointment. It was expectation. You have a choice, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. You can walk away from here now, with a severance package and a signed non-disclosure agreement. Or, you can stay and learn what it truly means to be a part of this industry. The room remained silent, every breath held captive. Ethan stared at her, his mouth dry. His job, his career, his reputation, everything hung in the balance. His fingers curled into fists. He had already made one terrible decision. He wouldn't compound it with another. I want to stay, he said, his voice not loud, but firm. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then let's see if you mean it. Ethan stood there, his heart hammering in his chest, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had just committed himself to staying, to proving that he was capable of change, but he had no idea what that actually entailed. Eleanor studied him for a moment longer before turning to Mr. Thorne. "I want him shadowing me for the next 2 weeks," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I want him to see how this industry actually works, not just from the surface, but from the ground up." Thorne blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Ms. Vance, are you sure?" "I don't repeat myself, Mr. Thorne," Eleanor said smoothly, her gaze hardening. "Either he learns or he leaves. Is that understood?" "Understood," Thorne said, regaining his composure. He turned to Ethan, a flicker of malice in his eyes. "You better not waste this opportunity, Belle." Ethan nodded stiffly, still unsure whether he had just dodged a bullet or stepped directly into the line of fire. Eleanor glanced at the assembled staff. "That's all for now. Everyone, back to work." The meeting dispersed quickly, the staff scattering like startled birds. But Ethan remained frozen, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what was worse, the pitying stares of his co-workers or the gnawing uncertainty about what Eleanor Vance had planned for him. She didn't say anything to him, but with a simple gesture, she signaled for him to follow her. They moved through the restaurant, past the bustling kitchen, and into a narrow back hallway that led to the delivery entrance. The smells of fresh produce, seafood, and disinfectant filled the air as workers unloaded crates from trucks, shouting out orders and inventory numbers. Eleanor stopped near the loading dock and turned to him. "Tell me what you see, Belle." Ethan frowned. Deliveries?" She didn't look amused. "You see the expensive dishes we serve, the exclusive clientele, the sleek dining room. But you don't see this. The people who make sure the kitchen is stocked, the ones who keep the business running before the first plate even leaves the kitchen. You don't see the effort and the hardship." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over him. Eleanor motioned to a man struggling to lift a heavy crate onto a dolly. "That's Marco. Been here for 8 years. Works harder than anyone in this building. Last month, a guest spilled a bottle of wine on him. A $500 bottle of wine. Didn't even apologize, and he just kept working. Do you know what it's like to be invisible? To be overlooked in a place you help keep alive, Belle?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. Eleanor exhaled, then gestured for him to follow her inside. They weaved through the chaotic kitchen, where the chefs were already prepping for the lunch rush. She moved with purpose and ease, greeting the staff by name, checking the preparation stations with practiced precision. Ethan trailed behind her, feeling like an outsider in a world he had only glimpsed from afar. Finally, she stopped at a small prep table near the back, grabbing a knife and a cutting board. "You ever prepped vegetables before, Belle?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "What?" Eleanor slid a bag of carrots onto the table. "You heard me? Chop them." Ethan frowned. I'm a waiter, not a chef." She gave him a sharp look. "You're someone who thinks service is just about who sits at the table. I need you to understand that it's so much more than that. Now chop." He hesitated, then picked up the knife. He had watched the kitchen staff perform this task countless times. How hard could it be? The blade slipped, the carrot rolling sideways. His grip was awkward, his movements clumsy. Eleanor didn't laugh, didn't smirk. She simply grabbed another knife and demonstrated, her hands moving with swift, precise efficiency. "Hold it like this. Keep your fingers curled so you don't cut yourself. Try again." Ethan exhaled and followed her instructions. It took several attempts, but eventually he found a rhythm. It wasn't pretty, but it was progress. "Better," she said, setting her knife down. "Now do the rest of the bag." His hand ached by the time he was finished. He didn't know how long they had been standing there, but when he looked up, the kitchen was in full swing. Plates flying out of the kitchen, orders shouted from every direction. The place was alive with activity, and for the first time, Ethan truly saw it. Not just the food or the luxury, but the relentless work, the dedication, the people behind it all. Eleanor leaned against the counter, watching him. "You judged me the moment I walked through those doors, decided I wasn't worthy of a table. But if I had been wearing a designer dress and carrying a Birkin bag, I bet you would have pulled the chair out for me yourself, wouldn't you, Belle?" Ethan swallowed, shame washing over him. I didn't think." "No, you didn't think," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "And that's the problem." The words stung, but she was right. She pushed away from the counter. "Come on, we're not done." For the next few hours, Eleanor had him shadowing different staff members, each experience a revelation. He spent time with the dishwashers, scrubbing plates amidst the oppressive heat and deafening noise. He helped the bussers clear tables, noticing how customers barely acknowledged their presence. He even stood at the hostess podium for a while, observing how first impressions were often based on snap judgments and superficial observations. By the time the dinner rush arrived, Ethan was exhausted. His arms ached, his legs felt like lead, and his head was spinning from everything he had learned. Eleanor finally allowed him to take a break, handing him a glass of water as they stood near the back exit. He took a deep breath. "I was an idiot," he said, the words laced with genuine remorse. She smirked. "You were, but at least you know it now." Ethan stared at the ground, the weight of his past actions heavy on his shoulders. "Do you think I can actually fix it, Ms. Vance?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment before answering. "That depends, Belle." She paused, her gaze piercing. "Are you just trying to save your job, or are you actually willing to change?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He thought about it, really thought about it. He thought about Eleanor's story, about the struggles she had overcome. He thought about Marco, toiling away in the kitchen, unappreciated and unseen. He thought about the woman at the door and the look of disappointment in her eyes. Finally, he nodded, his voice filled with conviction. "I want to change, Ms. Vance." Eleanor studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, she gave a small nod. "Good. Then let's see if you mean it." She turned and walked back into the restaurant, leaving Ethan standing alone by the exit. He straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and stepped back onto the floor of the Gilded Lily. But this time, he saw it with new eyes. The clinking of glasses, the quiet hum of conversation, the subtle elegance of the chandeliers. It was all the same, and yet it felt profoundly different. He had spent the last 2 weeks seeing the restaurant from every angle, from the dish pit to the prep stations, from the bussers' hurried steps to the hostess's delicate balancing act of seating guests without disrupting the restaurant's carefully crafted ambiance. He had witnessed the labor, the sacrifice, and the dedication that went into every perfect dish, every spotless table, every seamless moment that guests took for granted. And today, he was determined to prove that he understood. Eleanor sat at her usual table in the back, her gaze steady as she watched him work. She hadn't interfered since their training started, only observing, allowing him to learn and grow on his own. But Ethan knew she was waiting for something, a test, just like the one he had failed before. As the dinner service began, Ethan moved through the dining room with a newfound sense of purpose. He greeted guests with genuine warmth and enthusiasm, anticipating their needs before they even spoke. He listened attentively, making each guest feel valued and respected. He didn't just see orders anymore. He saw people, each with their own story, their own struggles, and their own inherent worth. The kitchen buzzed behind the scenes, the chefs orchestrating a culinary symphony. Ethan made sure to acknowledge their hard work, thanking them sincerely when he picked up each order. It was a simple gesture, but it made a difference. Suddenly, the front doors swung open, and the restaurant's atmosphere barely shifted. But Ethan noticed immediately. A man walked in, his shoulders slightly hunched, his clothes clean but well worn, his hands calloused. He hesitated just past the threshold, glancing around nervously, as if he wasn't sure if he belonged. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, offering a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome to the Gilded Lily," he said smoothly. "Dining alone tonight, sir?" The man blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard. His eyes darted towards the pristine white tablecloths, the polished silverware, and the impeccably dressed patrons. Yeah. Right this way, sir." Ethan grabbed a menu and led him through the dining room, ignoring the subtle glances and hushed whispers from some of the guests. He didn't care. He had done worse himself, and he wasn't about to make that mistake again. He pulled out the chair for the man, handed him the menu, and spoke to him with the same courtesy and respect he would extend to any other guest. "Can I get you started with some water, sparkling or still?" The man hesitated, his voice barely audible. "Just Regular water is fine. Ethan nodded. Take your time looking over the menu. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to help. He turned and walked back towards the server station, catching Eleanor's gaze from across the room. She didn't smile, she didn't nod, but something in her expression had softened. It was enough. Ethan focused on his job, moving through the restaurant with newfound grace and empathy. He treated every guest with respect, checking in at the right moments, anticipating their needs, and truly listening to their concerns. He didn't just see customers, he saw human beings, each deserving of his attention and care. By the time the man finished his meal, Ethan returned to his table, setting down the check. I hope you enjoyed everything, sir? The man nodded slowly, almost as if he was still processing the fact that he had been treated with the same courtesy and respect as the other guests. Yeah, it was really good. Thank you. Ethan smiled. I'm glad to hear that, sir. The man hesitated before reaching for the check, his hand hovering over the total. Without missing a beat, Ethan subtly slid a card next to it, a Gilded Lily dining voucher, covering the entire cost of the meal. The man's eyes widened in disbelief. I can't. Ethan kept his voice low, his tone sincere. It's already taken care of, sir. Just come back and see us again sometime. The man looked at him for a long moment, searching his eyes for any sign of insincerity. Then he nodded slowly. Ethan nodded back, then stepped away to attend to another table. A few minutes later, the man left. Eleanor Vance finally stood up, her movements deliberate, her gaze unwavering. She made her way towards Ethan, her presence commanding attention. Ethan wiped his hands on his apron, his heart pounding in his chest. He stood straighter as she approached. You learned something, Belle, she said simply, her voice devoid of any judgment. Ethan met her gaze, his eyes reflecting his newfound understanding. Yeah, Ms. Vance, I think I did. Eleanor studied him for a moment longer, her expression inscrutable. Good, because I'm not just giving you your job back. Ethan's stomach clenched. Was there another test? Another challenge? Eleanor reached into her purse and handed him a sealed envelope. Ethan hesitated before opening it, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw the number written inside. $50,000. His breath caught in his throat. What is this, Ms. Vance? It's an investment, Belle, Eleanor said, her voice softening. And an opportunity. Ethan looked at her, stunned. I need someone to help train my staff across all my restaurants, she continued. Someone who understands how easy it is to make the wrong assumptions, but who is willing to learn from those mistakes. Someone who gets that hospitality isn't just about luxury, it's about people. Ethan's fingers tightened around the envelope. You're offering me a promotion, Ms. Vance? Eleanor shook her head slightly. I'm offering you a choice, Belle. Her words hit him harder than they should have. The last time she had given him a choice, he had been desperate, just trying to salvage his career. Now she was offering him something bigger, something more meaningful, something that had the potential to change his life and the lives of others. He exhaled slowly, the weight of his past lifting from his shoulders. I want to do it, Ms. Vance, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Eleanor's lips quirked in the faintest of smiles. Then don't make me regret it, Belle. She turned and walked towards the exit, her silhouette framed against the setting sun. Ethan watched her go, then looked down at the envelope in his hands. 2 weeks ago, he had been so sure of what his job was, so certain of what the Gilded Lily represented. Now, he knew better. He wasn't just a waiter anymore, he was something more. And for the first time in his career, he was actually proud of that. He felt like his whole life has been rewritten. What do you think of Ethan's change? Has this story changed your perspective on the service and hospitality industry? What lessons can we learn from this about judging people based on appearances? Remember to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance or status. Let's strive to be more understanding and compassionate in our daily lives. Wishing you good health and happiness. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories.